We are, as a species, addicted to story. Even when the body goes to sleep, the mind stays up all night, telling itself stories. George Orwell's 1949 dystopian novel 1984 draws from post-war totalitarian anxieties to describe how individuals repress parts of the self that inevitably re-emerge in mental realms despite a regime's control. Satoshi Kon's 1997 debut film, Perfect Blue, a psychological horror, interrogates how media culture fragments identity by infiltrating private space and constructed persona. Both Orwell's and Kahn's works manipulate the manifestations of stories, physical realities, and the inner consciousness, through which people understand and express themselves internally and in a society, to examine how individuals perceive reality and therefore how power operates. Through the surveillance of domestic spaces, the scrutinization of the body, and establishing the subjective nature of truth, they strongly depict repression and expectation as a force that reshapes identity and the world from inside out. Orwell uses physical environments to stage a conflict between two competing narratives, natural descriptions, and the party's artificially constructed world. In the Pearl neighborhood, where barefooted children splash in the puddles and there is an angry yell from their mother, Orwell employs sensory realism and quotidian detail. This depicted normalcy as a physical manifestation of nostalgic longing grounds both Winston and the reader, against which the artificiality of the party becomes recognizable. The telescreen's hideous grinding speech, monstrous machine running without oil, externalizes authoritarian power as sensory aggression through deliberately visceral diction. The mechanical simile personifies ideology as an invasive organism, highlighting the unnaturalness of propaganda. The Pearl woman transforms dreadful rubbish from the artificial versificator into an almost pleasant sound, her voice momentarily altering the meaning of her environment. When Winston sees the surface of the glass as the arch of the sky, Orwell uses metaphoric substitution and physical imagery to blend the boundary between interior reflection and the natural world. Winston, remembering they're all under the same sky, shows how this shared motif becomes a collective human story. The physical world, through continued individual perceptions, becomes what the regime cannot monopolize. In Perfect Blue, Kahn constructs Mima's apartment as a physical realm whose simplistic realism anchors both character and viewer in a recognizable psychological world of an ordinary young woman, juxtaposing her constructed celebrity persona. The room's cramped layout, focusing on objects, explores the personality of the main character. The teddy bears and heart-shaped pillows point to innocence and infantilism of the 21-year-old, despite her desired image as a mature actress. This sensory domesticity immerses us, mirroring the Pearl neighborhood in 1984, inviting empathetic alignment. Alarmed that someone could be watching her, Mima quickly turns to the window, and the perspective is now zoomed outside, as a blue light emanates from every other window, except Mima's red one. This juxtaposition draws attention to her being in danger. The uniform blue light makes the other windows feel cold and clinical, foreshadowing her stalker being camouflaged, hiding in plain sight. In the next shot, Mima's voice overdubs the line, "Who are you?" It is first asked over the window shot, directed towards Mima's stalker, while simultaneously being a question she directs towards herself, especially as she grapples with the clash of her two personas, Mima the pop star and Mima the actress. Because her domestic space was rendered with normalcy, each subsequent distortion becomes more psychologically destabilizing, reinforcing the idea that stories transform the world by revealing how personal spaces reflect wider social forces. Orwell, meanwhile, utilizes the human body as a medium where repressed emotion materializes and as a projection of the meanings assigned to it by Winston, positioning bodily experience as a form of storytelling that influences both personal identity and collective consciousness. When Winston scratched his varicose ulcer, it had begun itching again. The tactile detail manifests physical symptoms produced by psychological constraint. Later, when the hidden varicose ulcer had subsided, the relief of the physical motif of the ulcer aligns with Winston's emotional reprieve with Julia, showing that the body registers freedoms he cannot articulate. Beauty similarly becomes a mechanism of narrative control in the world. Winston sees the Pearl woman blown up to monstrous dimensions like an overripe turnip. This grotesque naturalistic simile, followed by finding her beautiful, positions motherhood as a threatening force. Emphasis on her mass and labor as her mighty loins generate conscious beings reframes her body as a symbolic anchor for the collective, the possibility of outliving the party's narrative. By projecting meaning to her label and emotional expression against party ideology, it showcases that the world can be defined and thus influenced by personal interpretation. In Perfect Blue, the apparition of Mima's pop idol identity begins to grow, coming out of the computer to dominate the scene, always shown to be surrounded by a white light which represents purity. Khan utilizes his signature scene-to-scene psychedelic transitions. The presence of her previous innocent persona haunts Mima both literally and figuratively as an internalized shame of her transition and consequence of the parasocial relationship with the stalker. Orwell also constructs the mental realm as a place where Winston's emotional repression produces dream as an alternative narrative system. The party denies emotional nuance, insisting there be no dignity of emotion, no deep or complex sorrows. Yet, by the vivid dream image of Winston's mother looking up at him through the green water hundreds of fathoms down and still sinking, Orwell blends color symbolism and spatial distortion to restore emotional depth. The water blurs physical and mental realms, while the green depth associated with rot shows how a sealed-off past continues to exert meaning as suppressed emotions resurface as imagery that shapes Winston's understanding of loss and guilt. The party claims that reality exists only in the mind of the party. Through the exposure of O'Brien's decaying mortal body, pouches under the eyes, the skin sagged from the cheekbones, the absurdity of claiming immortality gets highlighted. Individuals like O'Brien, by collapsing their identity into the party's collective consciousness, imagine themselves as surviving through it. Orwell uses this paradox to demonstrate the mechanism by which power sustains itself as it redefines what counts as being alive. At the novel's end, Winston's memory of the smell of the damp cardboard surfaces involuntarily, a mundane sensory detail, resurfacing despite his torture and indoctrination. The mind tells stories the self tries to suppress. These dreams and illusions across the two texts operate as narrative evidence that inner stories can influence the world by manifesting emotional realities into physicality, asserting the human experience cannot be fully rewritten and how it might someday be reclaimed.